The air on Tythal 9 tasted like burnt copper and old prayers. Marin Voss noticed this before she noticed anything else. Before the ceilings that stretched 40 feet above her head. Before the chairs built for creatures that could crush a car by sitting down. Before the way the gravity pulled slightly wrong, like the station had opinions about how much she should weigh. She stepped off the transport shuttle and into the arrivals hall, with 5 other humans behind her. Earth's best, humanity's first ambassadorial team to the Galactic Integration Station, where newly contacted species came to prove they deserved a seat at the table. The table, she noticed, was 12 feet off the ground. Voss. Lieutenant Haruki Chen appeared at her shoulder. He was the tallest member of the team, at 6'1". In this room, he looked like a child, standing in his father's office. The welcome assembly starts in 20 minutes. Our section is the small one near the back. I saw it. Their designated area was a cluster of seats clearly meant for a species of moderate size that had canceled its attendance. The seats had been hastily lowered but not resized, so the humans would sit in them like toddlers in booster chairs, feet dangling above the floor. Voss cataloged this, filed it away, kept walking. The arrivals hall was filling. Species from across the galaxy filed in through doors sized for bodies that made Voss feel like a rounding error in nature's math. The Draelkin came first, 12 feet tall, insectoid, covered in exoskeletal plating that looked like someone had welded tank armor to a praying mantis. They moved in formation, every step a declaration of engineered violence. Behind them, the Goreshi, bovine, massive, each one close to a metric ton of muscle and horn, and a deep vibrating hum that Voss could feel in her molars. They traveled in herds, even here, shoulders pressed together, a wall of meat and confidence. Then the Pelathi, the Rethkari, a dozen species Voss had memorized from briefing files that hadn't prepared her for the scale of any of them. Every delegation was a display. Every entrance was a performance. Armor, venom glands, electrical discharge organs that crackled in the station's filtered light, claws that could open a shuttle hull like a tin can. Then the 6 humans walked in. 5'4" Marin Voss at the front, Chen behind her. Dr. Adaze Okafor, their xenobiologist, who kept adjusting her glasses like the prescription might fix the absurdity. Corporal Diego Reyes, built like a fire plug, and still the smallest combatant in the room by a factor of 3. Technical Sergeant Priya Lakshmi, whose eyes were already mapping the electrical systems in the ceiling. And Private First Class, Tomasz Wojcik, 22 years old, who looked exactly the way a 22-year-old should look when standing in a room full of aliens who could kill him by sneezing. The laughter started with the Goreshi. It was not a metaphor. The Goreshi produced a subsonic rumble when amused, a low, rolling vibration that pulsed through the floor and climbed up through Voss's boots into her skeleton. Other species joined. The Pelathi made a clicking sound. A Rethkari delegation member turned to its companion and said something that the universal translator rendered as, "Are these the larvae or the adults?" A Draelkin ambassador tilted its massive head at Voss. The translator caught its words a moment later. "There must be an error. This is a combat-rated integration program. These are decorative." Voss smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile she had learned in her first year of combat search and rescue. The one she wore when a helicopter was going down and the math said everyone should be dead, and she had decided the math was wrong. The smile that said, "I have noted your position, and I will be using that information later." She led her team to their oversized seats. They sat. Their feet did not touch the floor. Nobody mentioned it. Welcome, delegations, to the 400th cycle of galactic integration. The station's administrative intelligence spoke from everywhere at once, a voice like a cathedral organ tuned to boredom. You have been selected by your respective worlds as exemplars of your species' capacity for cooperation, survival, and contribution to the galactic community. Voss scanned the room. 26 species. She counted thread profiles the way other people counted ceiling tiles. Automatic, constant, half-conscious. The Dralkin were the obvious muscle. The Gureshi were the political mass. The Palathi had biotoxin sacs visible under translucent skin. The Rethkari could generate electrical fields strong enough to stop a heart. And then there were the Vurai. She almost missed them, which was the point. They occupied an elevated platform at the room's edge. Serpentine, 9 feet of coiled muscle covered in scales that shifted color with their mood. Currently a flat matte gray that the briefing files said meant observing. 2 massive Vurai sat motionless, watching the assembly the way a hawk watches a field. They had not reacted to the human's entrance, had not laughed, had not looked away. The larger of the two was Ambassador Kef Sorvand. Voss knew his file. Apex predator from a death world that made Earth's evolutionary history look like a children's story. His species hunted by persistence, tracking prey across volcanic plains for days until the target's body simply gave out. And currently looking at Marin Voss with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with amusement. She held his gaze. Across a room full of giants, the smallest person and the most dangerous one took each other's measure, and neither blinked. The assembly continued. Delegations introduced themselves. The Dralkin performed a ceremonial weapons display. The Gureshi declared their herd's lineage back 9,000 generations. Everyone was very large and very impressive, and very, very sure of their place in the hierarchy of things. Then a Palathi delegate, curious, perhaps bored, reached toward young Wojcik. 3 translucent fingers extended, biotoxin sacs pulsing faintly under the skin. May I examine the texture of? Voss moved. No sound, no warning. She was seated, and then she was standing between Wojcik and the Palathi hand, positioned so the delegate would have to go through her to reach him. She did not speak, did not raise her arms, did not make a threat. She just filled the space. The Palathi withdrew. The moment passed. Nobody in the room thought it was important. A small creature protecting a smaller creature. Instinct. Barely worth noting. Except Kef Sorvan. Across the hall, his secondary eyelids, the ones the briefing file said Vurai closed when processing unexpected information, slid shut and open again. A slow, deliberate blink. On his world, pack animals protected their young by surrounding them. Herd animals protected their young by fleeing. But predators, real predators, protected their pack by stepping forward, alone, into the gap. He had never seen a soft species do that. The welcome assembly ended. Delegations filed out. The humans climbed down from their 2 large chairs and walked back toward their quarters. A residential block clearly designed for something with more legs and fewer feelings. Voss walked in the middle of her team. Her hand rested on Wojcik's shoulder for 3 seconds. Then she let go and moved to the front. Every predator in that room had measured threat by size. That was useful information. The integration trials began on the 3rd day, and they were designed by people who had never imagined anything under 7 feet tall would attempt them. Trial 1 was an obstacle course. Climbing walls, balance structures, overhead traversals, all built to galactic standard dimensions, which meant the first handhold was 9 feet off the ground. Voss stood at the base of the wall with her team, and looked up. Chen looked up. Okafor looked up. Wojcik said what everyone was thinking. That's not even a little bit fair. Nope, Voss said. Reyes, get on Chen's shoulders. What followed was something no species in the gallery had ever seen. The humans stacked. They boosted. They threw each other at handholds and caught each other on the way down. Chen braced against the wall, and made himself a steck for Lakshmi, who made herself a rope for Okafor, who pulled Wojcik up by his belt, while Reyes pushed from below, with the grim determination of a man who bench-pressed trucks for fun. It was ugly, loud, graceless. At one point, Wojcik's boot caught Okafor in the ear, and she said something in Igbo that the translator refused to render. In the gallery above, the Draelkin watched with their heads tilted. The Goreshi rumbled. A Palathi delegate turned to its companion and said, "They are climbing each other. Is this normal?" The humans completed the course dead last, covered in bruises, grinning like idiots. No one understood the grinning. Several species filed it as a threat display. Trial 2 was different. The simulation chamber was vast, a generated ecosystem 3 kilometers across, stocked with engineered predatory fauna designed to test each species' survival capacity. Teams were dropped in with minimal equipment and given 12 hours to survive, contain, or eliminate the threats. The Draelkin were magnificent. They formed a phalanx and cut through every predator the simulation threw at them. Exoskeletons flashing, claws singing, they turned the biome into a slaughterhouse in under 4 hours. Clean, efficient, brutal. The Goreshi used mass. They herded together, lowered their horns, and charged anything that moved. The ground shook. The predators learned quickly that a metric ton of angry herbivore was not worth the calories. The Vurai did something elegant. Keth Sorvan and his partner moved through the biome like smoke, silent, their scales shifting to match every surface. They found the apex predator of the simulation, a 6-legged thing with too many teeth, and they killed it in under 30 seconds. Then they sat beside its body and waited. Nothing else in the biome came near them for the remaining 11 hours. Apex recognized Apex. Then it was the humans' turn. The gallery settled in to watch the comedy. Informal wagers had been placed. The Goreshi delegation was offering 3-to-1 odds the humans wouldn't last 2 hours. A Rethkari delegate had bet they would attempt to befriend the fauna, which everyone agreed was the funniest possible outcome. The 6 humans dropped into the biome. For the first hour, they did nothing. They sat in a clearing. They watched. Okafor took notes on a datapad. Lakshmi studied the wind patterns. Voss crouched at the tree line and didn't move for 40 minutes, her eyes tracking something no camera could identify. In the gallery, the Draelkin ambassador made a sound the translator rendered as pitiful. In the second hour, they started moving, but not toward the predators. They moved through the environment like they were reading it, testing soil density, marking game trails, noting where water pooled and where the canopy thinned. Chen found a narrow ravine. Reyes found a natural bottleneck, where 2 rock formations created a funnel. Lakshmi identified 3 species of ground cover that produced a chemical irritant when crushed. In the third hour, they built traps. Not technology, not weapons, geometry. They used the ravine, the bottleneck, the irritant plants, and a series of improvised snares made from equipment straps and twisted vines. They baited the traps with ration packs. Then they sat down and waited. The gallery had gone quiet. By hour 6, every predator in the simulation had been funneled, channeled, irritated, confused, and guided into containment zones so elegant they looked accidental. Not a single creature was dead. Not a single human had engaged in direct combat. The biome's own geography had become the weapon, and the predators had walked into cages they couldn't see because the cages were made of patience and landscape. Ket Sorvan watched the replay 3 times. The woman, Voss, had positioned her team like a Vurai hunting line. Not the brute force variant, the deep pattern, the one his species called Tethkarn, the patience of the coiled. You did not chase the prey. You understood the prey so completely that you could make it walk to you. It required absolute stillness, absolute observation, and a kind of predatory empathy that most Vurai spent decades learning. This human did it in 3 hours, in an ecosystem she had never seen before. Soft species did not do this. Then the simulation broke. A containment error, or perhaps a test within the test. One of the engineered predators, a fast-twitch quadruped built for ambush, glitched through the snare line and came screaming out of the undergrowth, straight at Wojcik. The kid froze. 22 years old and 160 pounds of human, standing in the path of something that weighed 8 times that, and was built from teeth and bad intentions. Voss didn't freeze. She didn't shout, didn't reach for a weapon. She stepped, one step then two, directly into the path of the creature, between it and Wojcik. Her arms came up, not in defense, but in presence. She made herself the obstacle. 5 feet, 4 inches of obstacle. The creature hit her across the ribs. She went sideways. Something cracked. The gallery's audio sensors picked up the sound, a wet snap that made the Pelethy delegate flinch. But Voss caught herself on a rock outcrop, set her feet, and stayed in the gap. The snare reset behind the creature. It tangled. It thrashed. It was contained. Voss straightened up, touched her left side once, quickly, the way a person checks their pocket for keys. Then she turned back to her team and said, "Snare 4 needs reinforcing. Chen, grab more vine." Nobody saw her reset the rib. She waited until the team was occupied, moved behind a supply crate, braced her back against it, pressed both hands against her left side, and pushed until something shifted back into a position that was close enough to correct. Her breath came in sharp, shallow pulls. Her vision whited at the edges. She stood up, walked back, continued the mission. The gallery's medical sensors flagged the injury. It appeared on screen. Human team leader, skeletal fracture detected, rib 7, left lateral. Several species looked at the readout, then at the feed showing Voss calmly directing her team, then back at the readout. A Goreshi delegate asked if the human medical data was calibrated incorrectly. Ketsorvan did not look at the readout. He looked at Voss, at the way she moved, carefully, economically, every motion recalculated around the injury, without acknowledging it. He had seen Vurai hunters do this. Take a wound in the field and fold themselves around it, let the body compensate while the hunt continued. It was predator behavior, not courage, not toughness, predator logic. The hunt does not stop because you are hurt. Soft species did not do this. The trial ended. The scores were posted. The humans ranked 3rd overall, behind the Draelkin and the Vurai. In a trial designed for species 3 times their size, with natural weapons the humans could not even imagine. 3rd, out of 26. The gallery was silent for a long time. Then the Draelkin ambassador stood, 12 feet of insectoid authority. "We formally request that the human delegation be removed from the remaining trials. For their safety. They are not equipped for..." Ketsorvan stood. He uncoiled from his platform, 8 feet of scaled muscle, matte gray shifting to a deep, warning red that every species in the room understood on an instinctive level. The Draelkins stopped talking. The Goreshi stopped humming. The room held its breath. Ketsorvan looked at the Draelkin ambassador. He looked at the gallery. He looked, for one moment, at a medical readout still glowing on the screen. Rib 7, left lateral. And at the feed showing Voss sitting with her team, feet dangling from a too large bench, laughing at something Wojcik had said. Laughing, with a broken rib, because her pack was safe. He spoke one word in Vorai, low, final, a sound like stones settling into place. The translator rendered it, "No." He sat back down. His scales faded to gray. The matter was closed. The oxygen levels in the human residential block dropped by 4% on the 7th night. Not enough to kill, just enough to make the headaches start. Okafor noticed first. She woke up with a pressure behind her eyes that felt like someone had inflated a balloon inside her skull. She checked the environmental panel by the door. The readings said everything was normal. The readings were lying. She brought it to Voss at breakfast. Voss listened, chewed a ration bar that tasted like cardboard, had given up on life, and said, "Pull the atmospheric data for our block, every hour, last 7 days." The data told a story. Oxygen down, carbon dioxide up, not in a straight line, in a pattern. Drops during sleep cycles, recovery during active hours. Just enough fluctuation to sit inside the tolerance range that station systems would flag as normal background variation. Just enough to make 6 humans a little slower, a little dumber, a little more likely to make mistakes during the trials. "Could be a calibration issue," Chen said. He didn't believe it. Neither did anyone else. "Pull the data for every residential block on the station," Voss said. Lakshmi did. It took her 4 hours. What she found turned a headache into something much worse. The atmospheric irregularities were not limited to the human block. 7 other species, all small, all politically minor, all recently contacted, were experiencing the same pattern. Oxygen suppression during rest cycles. Subtle enough to escape notice, unless someone was paranoid enough to check, which no one was. Because why would the station's own life support system target specific quarters? Unless someone told it to. Voss spread the data on the floor of their quarters. Actual paper printouts, because Lakshmi didn't trust the station's digital systems anymore, and had built a hardline connection to the atmospheric sensors using parts she'd stripped from a maintenance drone she'd found abandoned in a hallway. "The pattern targets low-mass species," Okafor said. "Every affected block houses a delegation under 300 kilograms average body weight. And every affected delegation is a first-contact species with provisional status," Lakshmi added. "No council vote yet, no political allies, no one to notice if they wash out of the trials because they can't think straight." Wojcik sat on the floor, with his knees pulled up. "So someone is poisoning us, and making it look boring enough that nobody checks." Voss looked at the data, looked at her team, looked at the maintenance shaft access panel in the ceiling of their quarters, a panel designed for repair drones, not people, which meant it was exactly the right size for humans and nothing else on this station. "I need 2 volunteers to crawl through ductwork for the next 12 hours, she said. Everyone raised their hand. The maintenance shafts of Tythal 9 were not built for habitation. They were built for small robotic units that didn't need light, air, or the ability to feel claustrophobic. The tunnels were 3 feet wide, pitch dark, and ran through the station's guts like blood vessels, connecting every system to every other system in a web of conduits, relay stations, and junction boxes that no organic being was supposed to navigate. Humans, it turned out, were very good at navigating places they weren't supposed to be. Voss and Reyes moved through the shafts for 11 hours. Voss went first, her broken ribs screaming every time she pulled herself over a junction lip. She didn't mention it. Reyes, behind her, could hear her breathing change at every obstacle. Shorter, sharper, the rhythm of someone managing pain by partitioning it, putting it in a box and dealing with it later. He didn't mention it either. They followed the atmospheric lines, traced the conduits from the affected residential blocks, back through relay junctions, through processing nodes, through the mechanical organs of the station's life support network, until they found it. A modification, small, elegant, installed at a junction that controlled atmospheric distribution to all 8 affected blocks. Someone had added a secondary regulator, a device that intercepted the station's normal atmospheric output and introduced micro-adjustments. Oxygen down, CO2 up, time to sleep cycles. Programmed to stay within tolerance ranges. It was not an accident. It was not a malfunction. It was a weapon disguised as weather. Reyes photographed it. Voss pulled the device's identifier tag. It was Goreshi manufacture. Back in their quarters, covered in duct grime, ribs pulsing, Voss laid out the evidence. The atmospheric data, the modification device, the Goreshi manufacturing tag, the pattern of targeted species, all small, all new, all without political protection. They're clearing the field, she said. Every species they knock out of the trials is one less vote on the council, one less voice. The Goreshi want to control the next seeding cycle, and they're doing it by making sure only the big survive. That's genocide, Okafor said. Her voice was flat, not shock, recognition. She had studied enough history to know what quiet elimination looked like. It's bureaucratic genocide, Voss corrected. The kind where nobody dies. They just get too sick to compete, wash out of the trials, go home, and never get a council seat. The Goreshi don't have to kill anyone. They just have to make the small species fail. Chen leaned against the wall. So we take it to station security. The council. Someone. Station security is staffed by Drailkin and Goreshi personnel, Lakshmi said. The council doesn't convene for another 6 days, and the Goreshi just happened to chair the Environmental Oversight Committee. The room was quiet. Voss thought about the welcome assembly. 26 species. The laughter, the way the room had sorted itself into a hierarchy based on mass and armor and the length of one's claws. She thought about the 7 other small species in their quarters right now, sleeping in thinned air, waking with headaches they blamed on homesickness. She thought about one species that had not laughed. I need to talk to Keth Sorvan, she said. Getting a private meeting with the Virai ambassador was not simple. The Virai delegation occupied the highest platform on the station, literally and politically. Their quarters were accessible only through corridors monitored by station security, which meant Goreshi eyes. Voss went through the maintenance shafts. She emerged from a ventilation panel in a corridor outside the Virai quarters, covered in grease, holding a data chip, with her rib making a sound she was choosing not to think about. A Virai guard, 7 feet of coiled muscle, looked down at her with an expression that the briefing files had not covered, but that Voss interpreted as, what? I need to speak with Ambassador Sorvan. It's urgent. The guard stared at her. Then it made a sound, a low, vibrating hum that Voss felt in her chest. Not laughter, something else. It stepped aside. Kef Sorvan's quarters were spare, a heated platform for resting, a single display showing what Voss recognized as the Trial 2 replay, her trial, paused at the moment she'd stepped in front of the Predator. He was watching it again. He turned when she entered. 8 feet of apex Predator, scales shifting from resting gray to a pale blue the files said meant alert, curious. His secondary eyes, smaller, set behind the primary pair, focused on her independently, tracking her movements with the precision of a targeting system. She held up the data chip. The Goreshi are poisoning 7 species through atmospheric manipulation. I have the evidence, the device, the pattern. I need someone with enough political weight to take this to the council before they bury it. He did not speak immediately. He looked at the chip, at her, at the grease on her arms, the way she stood with her weight shifted right to unload her left side, the maintenance shaft dust in her hair. You came through the service tunnels, he said. Not a question. The corridors are monitored. Those tunnels are 3 feet wide. For 11 hours. He had read the atmospheric logs. He knew how long she'd been in there. Voss didn't react to the number. I had company. A long silence. His scales shifted, blew to something deeper, something the files didn't have a translation for. Why me? She had expected the question, had her answer ready, had carried it through 11 hours of dark tunnels, and a rib that was beginning to feel like it had opinions. Because at the welcome assembly, when every species in that room looked at us and saw something small, you were the only one who looked at us and saw something real. The sentence sat in the air between them. Keth Sorvan's jaw plates shifted. His secondary eyes closed, both of them, simultaneously, which Voss had never seen before and which no briefing file had described. When he opened them, his scales had settled to a color she would later learn was the Vurai expression for a feeling that did not translate into any human language, but lived somewhere between recognition and grief. He took the chip. "The Goreshi will come for you," he said. "When this is known, the station will not protect your people." Voss smiled, the same smile from the welcome assembly, the one that was not warm. "We're persistence predators, Ambassador. We don't need protecting. We need a head start." His jaw plates twitched, the Vurai equivalent she was learning, of a laugh caught before it escaped. The Goreshi moved faster than Voss expected. Not 12 hours, 6. She was in the maintenance shafts again, mapping secondary escape routes, because Marin Voss did not believe in plans that only worked once. When Lakshmi's voice came through her earpiece, tight and controlled in the way that meant the opposite of controlled. "They've revoked our access credentials, all 6 of us, locked out of every system on the station, and Voss, there are 4 of them coming down the corridor." "For what?" "Goreshi, full security detail. Each one's about a ton." Voss closed her eyes, pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the shaft wall. Her ribs sent a polite reminder that it still existed and still hated her. "How long until they reach our block?" 8 minutes, maybe 7. They don't move fast, but they don't have to." 7 minutes, 6 humans, 4 Goreshi enforcers, each one 1,000 kilograms of horn and bone, and the absolute certainty that nothing human-sized could stop them. The math was clear. The math said run. Voss had never been good at math. Lock down the residential block. Every door, every panel. Reyes, start pulling the maintenance shaft covers. I want access points in every room. Lakshmi, I need you on the environmental systems. You have 6 minutes to turn our block into the worst place on this station to be a Goreshi. She started crawling. By the time she dropped out of the ceiling into their common room, her team had transformed the residential block into something between a fortress and a nightmare. Chen had barricaded the main entrance with furniture designed for species 5 times his size, heavy enough that even a Goreshi would need time to push through. Reyes had ripped panels off the walls to create narrow choke points in the corridors, gaps that a human could slip through sideways, but that a 1-ton bovine could not. Lakshmi was at the environmental controls, and she was smiling the way she smiled when she had found something she could break. "I can adjust local gravity in a 20-meter radius," she said. "Not much, 0.3 g variance. But if you weigh 1,000 kilograms, 0.3 g is 300 kilograms of extra weight on every step." Voss finished. "Do it. What else?" "Temperature. I can drop this block to 4 degrees Celsius. Goreshi are warm-blooded with a narrow thermal tolerance. They'll function, but they won't be comfortable." "Do it." "Atmospheric composition. I can increase oxygen concentration by 6%. Goreshi metabolize oxygen faster than most species. Higher concentration will accelerate their heart rate, make them agitated, impair their fine motor control. You're going to make them dizzy and angry. I'm going to make them dizzy and clumsy. The angry part they're bringing themselves." Okafor was crushing the chemical irritant plants she'd collected during Trial 2. The ground cover species that produced a compound which, when inhaled, caused temporary mucous membrane inflammation in most carbon-based respiratory systems. She'd mixed it with water from the sanitation system and filled 6 spray containers. "It won't stop them," she said, "but it will make them very unhappy to breathe." Wojcik was standing in the corner, holding a length of pipe he'd pulled from the wall. He looked scared. He looked ready. These were not contradictory states. "Voss," he said, "what if they don't stop?" She looked at him. 22 years old, the youngest person on a station built for giants, holding a pipe against things that could crush him without noticing. "Then we make stopping cost more than they're willing to pay." The Gorashi hit the first door 3 minutes later. The sound was enormous. 1,000 kilograms of shoulder against reinforced paneling. Once, twice. And on the third strike, the barricade shifted. Furniture scraped across the floor. The door buckled inward. The first enforcer pushed through the gap and entered the corridor. The gravity shifted. It was a subtle thing, 0.3 g, nothing that should matter to a creature built like a biological tank. But the Gorashi enforcer's next step landed wrong. Its hoof came down a fraction of a second too early, carrying 300 extra kilograms it hadn't expected. It stumbled. Not a fall, a stutter, a moment of wrongness. Then the temperature dropped. 4 degrees Celsius. The Gorashi's breath misted. Its hide contracted. Warm-blooded species on cold surfaces move differently, slower, tighter, every joint protesting the thermal loss. Then Okafor's compound hit the air. The enforcer's nostrils flared. Its eyes watered. A deep rumbling sound came from its chest. Not the amused rumble of the welcome assembly. Something rawer. It shook its massive head and pushed forward. The corridor narrowed. Reyes's choke points, panels ripped from the walls to create gaps barely wide enough for a human to pass sideways. For a Goreshi, they were bottlenecks. The enforcer wedged itself in, horns scraping metal, and the second enforcer stacked up behind it. And the corridor was full of confused, cold, itchy, gravitationally offended bovine, pressing forward through a space designed to punish everything about their size. The lights went out. Lakshmi killed the power to every lighting element in the block simultaneously. The darkness was absolute. The Goreshi had good low-light vision, but Voss had studied the briefing files. Goreshi navigated primarily by scent and spatial memory in darkness. In a space that had been physically reconfigured in the last 7 minutes, their spatial memory was useless. And the chemical compound Okafor had put in the air was destroying their scent tracking. They were blind, cold, heavy, irritated, lost. And somewhere in the dark, a human voice spoke. Calm, clear, carrying further than it should for something 5'4". You really should have taken us seriously. Reyes hit the first pressure vent. A jet of compressed atmosphere slammed into the lead enforcer's flank. Not enough to injure, enough to disorient. Enough to make a 1-ton creature flinch sideways in a narrow corridor in the dark. Chen triggered the second vent from a maintenance shaft above. Compressed air straight down on the second enforcer's back. The creature bellowed, lurched forward, jammed harder into the choke point. Wozik, hands shaking, pipe gripped so tight his knuckles had gone white, waited at the third choke point. The pipe was not a weapon. It was a noisemaker. He slammed it against the wall, once, twice, 3 times, and the sound rang through the metal corridors like a bell in a cathedral, rebounding, multiplying, disorienting. The Goreshi were trapped in a kill box built by creatures 1/10 their size, and every system they relied on, sight, smell, spatial awareness, thermal comfort, gravitational expectation, had been taken from them in under 4 minutes. In the council chamber, Ket Sorvon was on his feet. He had not waited 12 hours. The moment the Goreshi security detail had mobilized, he'd made his decision. Not a political calculation. Something older than politics. He stood before the full council, 8 feet of scaled predator, his scales burning a red so deep it was almost black. A color that every species in the room understood meant a Vurai was about to do something irreversible. I invoke Sorvon's claim, he said. The chamber went still. The translator rendered the words, but most species didn't need the translation. They knew the right. Every spacefaring civilization had heard of it. A Vurai blood oath, the declaration that bound one life to another. If the claim was false, the claimant died with the accused. No Vurai had invoked it for a non-Vurai species in 600 years. On what grounds? The Drailkin council chair leaned forward, mandibles clicking. Keth placed Voss's data chip on the chamber's central display. The atmospheric data filled the room. 7 species. Systematic suppression. Goreshi manufacturing tags. The pattern was undeniable. Projected 20 feet tall for every delegate to read. On the grounds that 7 species are being eliminated from these trials by deliberate atmospheric poisoning. On the grounds that the species who discovered this crime did so by crawling through tunnels meant for machines because no corridor on this station is safe for them. On the grounds that right now, at this moment, 6 humans are holding a residential block against 4 Goreshi enforcers using nothing but their minds and the air itself. He looked at the council. Every secondary eye open, his whole self speaking. You see something small. I see something that does not stop, that protects its wounded, that crawls through the dark and builds weapons from patience. On my world, we have a word for a creature like this. The chamber held its breath. Little brother. A station-wide broadcast. Council proceedings were public record. She was braced behind a barricade, maintenance torch in one hand, cold pack jammed against her ribs, listening to the Goreshi enforcers retreating down the corridor as station security, real security dispatched by the council, arrived to stand them down. Little brother. Her hands shook. Not from the cold, not from the rib, not from the adrenaline that was even now draining from her system and leaving the familiar emptiness behind. Her hands shook because someone who had never been to Earth, who had never seen a human before 10 days ago, had just bet his life on the word family. She put down the torch, pressed both palms flat against her knees, breathed. The shaking stopped. The corridor lights came back on. The gravity normalized, and the 6 humans were still standing in their barricaded block, surrounded by the wreckage of furniture and wall panels and chemical spray, breathing hard, alive, unhurt, victorious in the way that small things are victorious, not by overpowering what came for them, but by making the cost of taking them too high to pay. Wojcik sat down on the floor. The pipe rolled out of his hand. He put his face against his knees and laughed until the laughter turned into something else. And Okafor sat beside him and put her hand on his back and didn't say a word. Reyes leaned against a wall and closed his eyes. Chen started quietly moving the furniture back. Lakshmi restored the environmental systems to default settings, except for the oxygen, which she left 2% high, because, as she put it, we've earned the good air. The Goreshi delegation was removed from Tythal 9 on the 9th day. It was not dramatic. No standoff. No last defiant roar. Station security, a mixed detail now, not Goreshi staffed, not anymore, escorted the delegation to their shuttle in silence. The herd walked close together, shoulders touching, the way they always walked. Except now the formation looked less like confidence and more like the thing it had always been underneath. Fear of open space. Fear of being singled out. The other delegations watched from the gallery. Nobody rumbled. The council voted that afternoon. The atmospheric sabotage evidence was entered into the permanent record. The 7 affected species were granted medical extensions on their trial schedules. A formal investigation was launched into Goreshi political operations across 12 other integration stations. And humanity was granted provisional seating on the Galactic Council. The vote was not close. Voss sat in the council chamber for the announcement. The chair assigned to the human delegation was still too large. The station's fabrication units had not yet produced a replacement. So she sat in it the way she sat in everything on this station, with her boots 3 inches off the floor, and her spine straight, and the absolute refusal to look like she didn't belong. Chen sat to her left, Okafor to her right. Reyes, Lakshmi, and Wojcik behind them. 6 humans in a room built for giants, taking up exactly as much space as they needed, and not an inch more. The council chair, a new one, Rethkari, appointed after the Drilkin chair had resigned over the security staffing failures, read the resolution. Humanity would have 1 vote, 1 voice. Provisional status for a 5-year evaluation period, subject to review. One voice out of hundreds. Voss thought about the welcome assembly, the laughter, the subsonic rumble she'd felt in her molars. One voice out of hundreds was more than zero, and zero was what they'd had 10 days ago. She accepted the resolution on behalf of Earth. She said the words the diplomats back home had written for her. She said them clearly and simply, and without decoration, because Maren Voss did not decorate. Then she stepped down from the podium. Literally stepped down, a 2-foot drop that the podium's designers had never considered, and walked back to her team. Wojcik was grinning. "We did it. We survived it," Voss corrected. "Those are different verbs." The celebration, such as it was, happened in the human quarters. Ration bars. Water. Lakshmi had figured out how to coax the station's food synthesizer into producing something that approximated coffee, though it tasted like someone had described coffee to a machine that had never met a bean. They drank it anyway. Okafor raised her cup. "To the maintenance shafts." "To the maintenance shafts," 5 voices replied. Shen raised his. "To Lakshmi's gravity trick." "To the gravity trick." Reyes raised his. "To the kid with the pipe." Wojcik turned red. Everyone drank. The knocking came at 2200 station time. Voss opened the door. Kef Sorvan stood in the corridor outside. Or rather, he crouched in it, because the human block ceilings were 7 feet high and he was 8. His scales were a color Voss hadn't seen before. Not the matte gray of observation, not the alert blue, not the warning red. Something softer. She didn't have a translation for it yet. "Ambassador," she said. "Sergeant." She stepped aside. He entered by folding himself through the doorway in a way that should have looked ridiculous, and instead looked like water flowing through a narrow gap. He settled onto the floor. The furniture was pointless, and coiled his lower body into a resting spiral. His head was still near the ceiling. Her team stared. Okafor recovered first. "Coffee? It's terrible." "I accept terrible coffee," Kef said. He held the cup, tiny, absurd in his hand, a thimble between talons, and drank. His jaw plates shifted. The Vurai expression for something was complicated, and Voss was beginning to think the expression covered a lot of territory. "You did not tell me," he said, "about the pipe." "The pipe?" "Your youngest, the one with the pipe. He used it as a sound weapon." Voss glanced at Wojcik, who was doing his best to be invisible behind Shen. He improvised. He was frightened. Yes. He stayed. Yes. Keth set the cup down. Looked at her with all 4 eyes, primary and secondary, focused on the same point, which Voss had learned meant he was going to say something he considered important. "On my world there is a creature called the Velketh. It is small, smaller than you. It lives in the crevices of the thermal plains, in the spaces between rocks where larger predators cannot reach. It has no venom, no armor, no speed. It survives because it does not stop. It watches, it learns, it adapts. And when the thermal storms come, the ones that drive every other species underground, the Velketh stays on the surface, not because it is immune, because it has learned to read the wind, and it moves between the fire. It is the only species on our world we do not hunt. It is beneath us in size and above us in endurance, and my people decided 10,000 years ago that such a thing deserves a name." "What name?" "Kethvarin. It translates imperfectly as the small one who walks through fire. My people consider it a term of deep respect. We give it to allies, to mates, to the ones who stand beside us and do not run." His scales shifted again, that warm, unnamed color. "I have never met a species that reminded me of the Velketh, until now." The room was quiet, not the quiet of the council chamber or the gallery, a different kind, the kind that happens when something true has been said, and nobody wants to be the first to breathe after it. Voss sat on the floor across from him. Her rib ached. It was going to ache for weeks, maybe longer. She'd had it properly scanned. Hairline fracture, 7th rib, left lateral. And the station's medical unit had offered to accelerate healing with a bone-knitting device. She'd accepted. She was stubborn, not stupid. On our world, she said, we have a tradition. When someone stands beside you, really stands beside you, in the way that costs something, we don't have a special name for it. We just call them family. Family, Keth repeated. The translator handled the word, but she could hear him trying the sound of it underneath the translation. The way it sat in his mouth, foreign and familiar at the same time. Little brother, she said, that's what the translator gave us, for what you said in the council. The translation is imperfect. What's the perfect version? He thought about it. His scales cycled through 3 colors she couldn't name. The one I would die beside. The one whose hunt is my hunt. The small one who is not small. Voss looked at him. 8 feet of apex predator sitting on her floor, holding a cup of terrible coffee, speaking about family in a language built for creatures that could kill anything in the galaxy. That's better than little brother, she said. Yes, but I'm keeping little brother. His jaw plates twitched. That caught laugh again. I expected you would. They talked until 0300 station time. Not about politics, or the Goreshi, or the council vote. About hunting. Vurai persistence hunts across thermal plains. Days of tracking, reading the land, waiting for the prey's body to quit. Human persistence hunting on the African savanna. The same thing. Almost exactly the same thing. Separated by a galaxy and arrived at independently by 2 species that had nothing in common except the refusal to stop. 2 species built by different stars, who had both looked at the universe and said, I will outlast you. Shen fell asleep against the wall. Okafor drifted off with her glasses still on. Reyes snored. Lakshmi curled up in a corner with her datapad clutched to her chest. Warchike was out before midnight, face peaceful. The tension of the last 10 days finally unwound. Voss stayed awake. So did Keth. They talked quietly, about nothing important, about everything important, in the way that people talk when they have found the rare and specific thing of someone who understands. The next welcome assembly was 30 days later. A new species, the Tiavali. Small, smaller than humans. Bioluminescent, fragile. Their bodies were translucent. Their limbs thin. Their voices barely audible to most species' hearing range. They entered the arrivals hall in a cluster, pressed together, their light pulsing in rapid, frightened patterns. The laughter started. A Rethkari delegate produced a crackling sound. A new Drelkin cohort flexed. The familiar hierarchy asserted itself. Mass, armor, claws, venom, and the Tivali dimmed. Their bioluminescence faded. Their bodies contracted. They were trying to become smaller, because smaller meant less visible, and less visible meant less of a target. Then Voss stood. Front row, human section, 2 large chair. She stood, and she stayed standing. 5 feet 4 inches of persistence incarnate, dressed in a standard-issue uniform she'd modified to fit, with a rib that had healed crooked, because she'd set it herself in a supply crate's shadow. Keth Sorvan stood beside her, scales shifting to a deep, steady gold, a color Voss now knew meant, this is my ground, and I am not moving from it. His secondary eyes swept the room. Every species that had been laughing met those eyes and found something in them that made the laughter feel expensive. The room went quiet. Voss stepped forward, walked toward the Tivali delegation. Their lights flickered, uncertain. She stopped at a respectful distance, crouched so she was closer to their height, which was not something anyone in this room had ever done for anyone else. I know, she said. Everything is too big. The chairs are wrong. The air smells weird. And everyone in this room thinks your size is the most important thing about you. She smiled. Not the combat smile, something warmer, harder earned. It isn't. Extended a hand. We save seats for the little ones. The Tivali delegation leader, a creature of light and glass, and the kind of courage it takes to walk into a room full of giants, reached out one translucent hand and took hers. Behind them, Keth Sorvan settled his weight and watched the room with the patience of a species that had hunted across volcanic plains since before the first human walked upright.